Welcome to another edition of APIsec Presents. I've got two awesome guys. One you'll know very well, our buddy Corey, and we're joined by Casey Wassom from Moss Adams as well. I'm actually super excited about this session. I'm really curious about PCI. There's a whole new twist at PCI that's rolling out as we speak. So we're going to be talking about PCI compliance and API security. I don't know a whole lot about this topic, but I do know there's a new version of the DSS 4.0 requirement. I took a look at 3.0, didn't mention APIs at all, and the 4.0 sure does. It's definitely an important part of the new edition of PCI. So we'll be diving into all that and getting into the weeds of what those requirements are. We'll kick things off with a intro to PCI, a 101, and really try to give everyone kind of a level set on what is PCI, what are these different standards. So Katie will walk us through that. And then we'll actually get into specific sections and what they mean for APIs. And we got our buddy Corey here to help us add some color to that. Before we get started, though, Casey, could you just say hello and give us a little bit about your
Yeah,
background,
thanks,
what you
Dan.
do?
So Casey Wassom, I'm a senior manager with Moss Adams. I work in our cybersecurity practice, and I'm one of the lead QSAs for Moss Adams. QSA is a PCI term. It stands for Qualified Security Assessor, and that is the designation that you need to hold in order to perform independent third-party assessments. And so that's largely what takes the majority of my time is performing those third-party assessments for different organizations or consulting on PCI services to be able to answer anything PCI related. And that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I'll just mention everyone here. If you want to learn more, the Moss Adams website actually has a whole bunch of really good resources. I learned a whole lot from just going and checking it out and reading some of the guides, a good source of info. Corey, you don't need an intro, but give us a little intro, please.
Corey Ball, Senior Manager of Penetration Testing over at Moss Adams, performing different types of pen tests from web apps, APIs, and network pen tests for our clients over at Moss Adams. And then when I'm not doing that, I'm Chief Hacking Officer over at APIsec University, going through creating some courses. We have the API pen test course out, API Security Fundamentals, and then a couple micro courses out, and a new course to be released soon. And then, of course, author of Hacking APIs.
Yeah, we got to plug the book. There it is. If you're interested in API security, that has got to be the first stop. So let's get right into this. First question is, what is PCI? Who does it apply to? Kind of just give us the 101, the cliff notes on PCI, please.
Yeah.
Casey.
So talking about kind of the who, what, and why of PCI, you might not even know what PCI stands for. And if you don't, it stands for Payment Card Industry. The who behind PCI is the card brands. So the main card brands that are out there, Discover, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, JBC, and even more recently, Union Pay. They are the main card brands that direct the PCI organization. And the PCI organization is known as the PCI SSC. And SC stands for Security Standards Council. So the main card brands oversee this organization. There's individuals who run that organization, and they have a fourfold mission, which is represented here on this slide. And this is taken from their About Us page on the PCI website. So they have this fourfold mission, and two of the pillars here you'll see, the one in the gray as well as the one on the right that is in green. They focus on standards and standard creation, as well as evolution, as well as improvement and consistency with industry trends and the way that the security evolves over time. So that's the who and the what behind PCI. The PCI Council maintains those standards, and they maintain a wide variety of them. So this slide you see here, currently there are 15 standards that are maintained by the PCI SC. A lot of these you probably never heard of, and for good reason. A lot of these are very niche standards that you will never really know or be familiar with unless you are within the payment industry specifically, serving a very specific service within inside of the payment ecosystem. We're not going to talk about all these today, but I just wanted to bring them up to make you aware that they do exist and that the PCI does oversee all of these standards to help ensure security throughout the payment ecosystem. The one that we're going to talk about today and really focus on is that one that's represented in the top there, which is called the Data Security Standard, and it's known as the DSS for short. By far, it is the most impactful standard that the PCI oversees and maintains. And you can see that represented here on this diagram, even from their website, that this standard impacts all potential stakeholders, potentially across the payment lifecycle. So we're going to dive into the PCI DSS. And if you ever hear the term PCI, this is likely the standard that's being talked about because it is the standard that impacts the most individuals or organizations out there.
And Casey, like some of the other ones, there's like point of sale, there's hardware, there's standards around all of those types of things. But if you're a merchant, a retailer, someone online, no matter what you're doing with credit cards, this DSS is going to apply to
Yeah,
you.
more than likely. Again, it depends on your interaction with cardholder data. And we're going to talk about that in a minute as far as how the standard applies and why that's so important to determine as you perform an assessment or need to perform an assessment. But you're correct. A lot of these other standards are dedicated to specific stakeholders within the payment ecosystem who offer up point of sale software, for example, or a point to point encryption solution, things like that. And they're standards that are meant to be maintained for that particular service so that the industry as a whole can validate that there's a level of consistency that's being implemented in regards to security.
And I noticed there's a question here from Jeffrey. I've heard the term PADS, and he's saying it ended life last year.
Correct.
Is
Yeah,
that
that is correct. Yeah, this is still the image that they have on their website, though. The PADSS has been replaced with the SSF, the Secure Software Framework. So the PADS was the historic program that was used to validate payment applications that were used. It has now been sunsetted, and it is now the SSF is what it's referred to.
Let's double click on this DSS. So help us understand like what it covers. And I know we're going to get into like very specific sections here shortly, but just give us the overview of
Yeah.
DSS.
So what the DSS is and who it applies to, as I mentioned earlier, it can really be anybody that has some form of interaction with cardholder data or the ability to affect the security of cardholder data. And when we say cardholder data, usually we're talking about the PAN, which is the 16-digit number or 15-digit if you're talking Amex. That's the data that we're talking about. And in PCI 4.0, which we're going to get into obviously here, they refer to that as account data. They'll use that term within the standard. You'll see that they've replaced the term cardholder data with account data. And again, it's referring to that 16 or 15-digit number that's associated with the credit card. Who this applies to traditionally for most entities or organizations that take payment or provide a service that's within inside of the payment ecosystem are merchants or service providers. So when you are performing PCI compliance or when you're trying to perform an assessment to that standard, you're either doing one of two things. You're either doing it as a merchant or you're doing it as a service provider. Merchant's pretty straightforward. It's somebody who's taking payments in exchange for goods or services, and they're evidencing that the way that they take that payment data and ultimately submit it back to their acquiring bank is done within relation to the standard. And so that's what we call merchant compliance. And merchant compliance is typically submitted to an acquiring bank who wants to see that the way that their transactions are being received from that entity that the organization's name is doing it in regards to the DSS standard. The second option is service providers. Service providers fit in just about anywhere. You could be a service provider that provides a security tool that organizations or merchants use that helps secure their payment environment. And therefore, you might have customers who say, hey, I use this for PCI. Therefore, can you please show me that you are PCI compliant? And so organizations that provide services, security tools, things like that, they might be requested from their customer base. And there might be an expectation that they go out and they get PCI DSS certified for that specific service that they provide.
Yeah. We got a question here from Robert about, does this apply in Africa? And as far as I understand, if you got credit card data, if you're using Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, whatever, then it applies. Doesn't matter where you are, what type of business. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. Yeah. PCI is a global standard. Yeah. And I see James made a call out as well about sensitive authentication data. That's correct as well, James. Thank you for making that distinction as well. So sensitive authentication data is other elements of payment information that is captured. The standard does address it. However, in large part, you are not meant to store or do anything with that data after authorization. And so typically that data never lives inside of the environment outside of being transmitted for payment and authorization. Once that's there, it is removed. And so it does impact the scoping of PCI DSS, but largely that data is always going to be accompanied with the PAN, which is where the focus of the need for DSS is in the first place.
And maybe a follow-up here from Jeffrey is on my mind. Does this apply if you're not storing cardholder data, right? If I use Stripe or PayPal or something like that to do processing on my website, am I subject to PCI?
Yes, you can be. The answer is you can be, yes. In fact, best practice is to not store the data if you don't need to. That's one of the first things that you'll hear in regards to being able to descope certain requirements in PCI is if you don't need the data anywhere, don't send it there and don't store it. Obviously, limiting your footprint, it would be in best regards in a security perspective as well as from a compliance perspective.
We hear that kind of across the board. We did a webinar a couple of weeks ago on banking security, and the recommendation was data minimization. Don't collect any more fields, don't keep data, don't do anything. That's just increasing your surface area. So when I look at this screen, I'm seeing a whole bunch of categories from maintaining and securing the network, how we store data, doing testing and vulnerability assessments and monitoring and so forth. So covering all the bases here, it looks like DSS is. And I think we're going to be zeroing in on item 6 here. Is that what we're going to be
Correct. Yeah,
focusing on?
that's right, Dan. So we're going to dive into a couple of requirements. Before we do that really quick, I just wanted to mention what the core elements of a PCI DSS assessment are, just so everybody's aware. And we could make this whole webinar about PCI specifically. We're really just trying to do an intro here. I see a lot of questions coming up in the chat about points that I've already made, and I'm happy to answer those during the Q&A at the end a little more. We want to focus on API security within PCI, obviously, as part of this. And I'm just trying to really do a brief intro of PCI. But it's very important to note, I think, the core elements of what PCI DSS involves as far as if you were to go through an assessment. The first aspect of any PCI DSS assessment, and it is the most important part, is to scope it appropriately. So what that involves is it's determining the network, and I'll use the term system components, and that's the term that the PCI SSC uses. The system components, which can be anything really. It can be an application, it can be a server, any system component that stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data, or can affect the security of a system that stores, processes, or transmits cardholder data. So figuring out essentially where the requirements apply based off of the interactions that you have with cardholder data. So looking at your payment channels, understanding where you have touch points with the cardholder data, and then understanding, okay, based off of these requirements that you're seeing on the slide right now, where do I need to apply these requirements? What requirements even apply to me? And figuring that out so that you know that you're reviewing your environment and the services you might be providing to an adequate level. That is very critical to make sure that you're accurately performing an assessment to the proper scope. I've seen organizations who miss the mark by going too low. I've even seen organizations do too much because they appropriately understand a lot of the guidance that's been given by the council regarding how scoping should work.
Scoping's like drawing the boundary around what's relevant to PCI that needs to be certified, that needs to be audited, and then what's outside of it doesn't touch data, is not relevant to it. Let's talk about the new version of PCI DS and the timeline here. So we're at 4.0. When did it come out? And any sort of color you can add
so
there?
what you're looking at here is the timeline that PCI Council is currently working on. As you can see there, they have asterisks that this could still be subject to change. Currently, this is the slated release cycle of PCI DSS version 4.0. It's already been released. It was released a year ago, essentially a little over a year ago is when the standard was first released. And before that, they went through a number of different RFPs. I think there were 3 different rounds of RFPs which my organization, Moss Adams, helped participate in to provide feedback for. The official release has now happened, and we are currently in the transition period, as is shown in this diagram right here. Currently, you can perform a PCI DSS assessment to version 3.2.1 or 4.0. You have the option to do one or the other. But starting as of March 31st, 2024, so next year, as you see on the slide, version 3.2.1 will no longer be acceptable. So you will then have to perform all assessments and submit assessments past that date to the version 4.0 standard. And then the last bubble there on the right-hand side, there are requirements that are found within the 4.0 standard that are what they call future dated requirements, where they are currently listed in the standard, but they basically are giving a longer runway to implement those requirements as they realize they might be very impactful to some organizations to actually implement proper controls to meet that requirement. And so they give a runway upfront anyway to do 4.0. We've had a year now basically to look at it. We have almost another year before it's required. And then you're going to have even another long way for certain requirements to be aware of those and watch for those.
Yeah. And I think the key date here is that March 31. So by March 31 next year, everyone needs to be on the 4.0
Correct.
standard. All right. This is what we've really all come here for. Let's talk about what's new in 4.0. As I said, I took a peek at the 3.0, did a control F for API and didn't return any results, but definitely lit up on a number of different sections here. So we're going to talk about 4 specific sections, 622, 624, and so forth. What are we looking at here with 623? And Corey, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what this means as you've been out there on the front lines working with folks doing audits and pen testing. But Casey, what's 623 all
So
about?
623 it's a requirement that existed in the previous standard. It is what I like to just call a code review requirement. If you look at the language there on the left where it says the defined approach requirement, that is the language of the requirement itself. So just to read the first part, it states the bespoke and custom software is reviewed prior to being released into production or to customers to identify and correct potential coding vulnerabilities. And then it provides a list of bullets that expectation is meant to include. To clarify what bespoke means, that's a term that the PCI Council just rolled out with version 4.0. It is essentially custom software that's developed for you, but by another entity. So it's not open source, but it is code that is developed by an outsourced vendor that is provided specifically for your environment. So non-internal personnel, essentially, who are developing a custom product. So this is a requirement that applies to any custom service that you have, an application, an API, obviously, that you're using that might have direct implications to interaction with cardholder data or security of cardholder data. And the requirement here is meant to be such that when you are going through the development of that service, whatever it is, you are implementing good code review practices. A note on this requirement with 4.0, they did break this up into 2 components. This used to be focused on manual code reviews. They now have broken this up where the next requirement below this, which we won't show, but it is requirement 6.2.3.1. It does focus on manual code reviews. So what they've essentially done is they've said that you have the ability to meet this requirement through automated mechanisms. And then if you're not doing that, you can do manual code reviews, which incorporate a couple of different other elements. But getting into the API specific nature of this, you can see over there on the guidance column, with each of these requirements that the council has provided, they provide guidance and kind of background for what's the best practice or what's the use of this. Why are we talking about this? And you can see here that they talk about that code reviews can impact how certain embedded tools like libraries or APIs can affect the security of your own code base that you're using. And so that's where APIs come into play here.
And sorry, Corey, just when I see code reviews, I think about visually reviewing this. Are we talking about testing here as well? Corey, what's your take?
Yeah, this could be a combination of static or dynamic application security test, reviewing the code for known vulnerable third-party software libraries. In addition to that review, the bullet point right above, even though it doesn't specifically call out APIs, that is a pretty large issue with APIs, which is improper inventory management, exposing unsupported versions of the API. So similar to that good practice right below, an API is exposing an unsupported version, it's not going to be held to the same security standards as the rest of the application and could be vulnerable to all sorts of different attacks. And then
You're referring to the searching for undocumented features bullet?
yeah, that good practice is to help take care of that improper inventory management risk.
Yeah. To use the OWASP term there. Yeah, we see many a breach where undocumented API endpoints are published in there for the convenience maybe of a development team for troubleshooting. Those API endpoints will get discovered and used and exploited. Certainly relevant to 6.2.3.
Yeah. And then the other good practice right below, checking for correct use of logging to prevent sensitive data from getting into logs. We see that all the time with mobile APIs being used to store sensitive data, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And so making sure that sensitive data isn't being stored as a screenshot or as any sort of logging information.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm curious, Casey, why is this applied to third-party developed code? Is it not like the code we develop in-house is not subject to
It
this?
could be as well, right? Code reviews are meant to be done over anything that's being implemented, as it says there, into production or to customers. So this is going to be for your own, say you're developing your own API to interact with other data. Anything that you release essentially that is an in-scope repository for a custom service or application that you're running, whether it's middleware or front UI or whatever it is, this requirement could apply to that software, and you would need to implement this requirement to implement code reviews prior to releasing it.
Let's move on to 624. Walk us through this.
So I sum this one up as the code flaws requirement. And you can see there at the top of the language there, they talk about using software engineering techniques or other methods being defined so that software development personnel are preventing or mitigating common software attacks and related vulnerabilities in bespoke or custom software, including the following. So this requirement was found in version 3.2.1 as well. It used to be the old 6.5 requirement. It used to span a number of 10 different sub bullet points. They've now condensed it down into one specific requirement here where they bulleted out the different code flaws, as I like to refer to them as, that need to be known, and there needs to be techniques or methods that are used in order to prevent the introduction of these flaws into the software, the custom or bespoke software that you're developing that is interacting or in scope for that PCI assessment that could be interacting with that cardholder data. Mentioning here, obviously, on that fourth bullet point down there, they talk about attacks on business logic that could involve potentially the manipulation of any APIs that you might be releasing that might have some kind of interaction with the cardholder data.
Yeah, and specific to that one, attacks on business logic, that's going to be any feature that can be leveraged in an attack against the application, likely unintended, but those are very difficult to detect with automated software. It has to be manually tested, has to be caught early during the design of the application. But outside of this one bullet that happens to mention APIs, the larger scale items that actually affect APIs more are all over this. We see the bullet right below that talks about access control mechanisms, and there are 4 of the new OWASP API security top 10 are authorization related. And broken object level authorization is by and far the vulnerability that we see the most with APIs. And so that item there is actually one of the more important items to detect when looking at APIs, making sure that user is only able to access and interact with user A's resources. They're not able to transfer resources from another user or get into someone else's bank account or anything else that's API is being leveraged for. In addition, injection attacks are still prevalent in APIs. And then the attacks on cryptography. In the previous slide, we talked about making sure that the consumption of API data was being done correctly. There aren't security misconfigurations, and an API that's being leveraged for payment data should always be encrypted. There shouldn't be instances where that data in transit is not encrypted.
Yeah, it's interesting that one of these 6 bullets mentions APIs, but it's probably relevant to all 6 of them. I was personally quite pleased to see the words business logic. That's even made its way into the new OWASP API security top 10. They call them business flows. But we talk a lot about real world API breaches in the API security fundamentals course on APIsec U. And we see so many examples of APIs being manipulated in unintentional ways through flaws in the logic of the application. And there's really no way to stop or prevent that with firewalling or anything like that. You really have to correct the logic in the application, and even better, code those applications to have sound, secure logic from the get-go. So this one's really interesting. It's clearly testing is a critical requirement to meeting 624 to make sure that you aren't exposing yourself to injection attacks or logic flaw attacks or that sort of thing. So let's move on to 632. What are we looking at here, Casey?
So this is a brand new requirement that's come forth in version 4.0. It was not found in the prior versions. And what it is, it's a requirement about maintaining an inventory, compiling an inventory of bespoke and custom software and or third-party software components that are incorporated into bespoke or custom software that you use. And all that's done to help maintain and facilitate patch management. So, like I said, this is a brand new requirement. It's not one that's been tested before in prior versions. When I've had conversations with my clients about this requirement so far in some of the gap assessments that I've been performing for version 4.0, I've gotten a lot of feedback, and I've heard a lot about tools like Sneak or Dependabot or tools like this that they're set up to monitor repositories that are in scope for their PCI environment. And they use these tools to be able to detect embedded libraries that are found within those repositories so that they can receive alerts and monitor if there are updates that are supplied to them. One thing that I noted going through that sounds like a great tool, and I think it's something that should be looked into if you're interested, is it provides that automation to be able to monitor those embedded libraries. But there are other things potentially that are those kind of tools are not going to be able to catch, that depending on what you're using and what you're embedding into your code base. And one of those very well might be an API where you're embedding API logic in order to pull down additional data from outside sources. And these tools, depending on how they're configured or what they might do, they might not be able to catch some of those additional calls that you're making out to third-party services to pull down data. So this is a new requirement. It's pretty interesting in that way. And again, I haven't performed many 4.0 assessments to this date currently, as most people are still doing version 3.2.1. But it'll be interesting to see how some of these new requirements like this evolve and how we'll see clients implement tools to be able to address these.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about Corey OWASP. Is it the new number 10? Is that the
Unsafe
risk from? Sorry.
unsafe consumption of APIs.
Yeah, unsafe consumption. I was trying to remember the language here, right? Consumption, I think we're talking about consumption of third-party APIs. And one thing, when I see like vulnerabilities in third-party components, libraries, things like that, people tend to think about vulnerabilities like CVEs, common vulnerabilities, things that get reported on Patch Tuesday and that sort of thing. And that's fair. There's different types of vulnerabilities here, right? If you're using a third-party API and that API can be exploited somehow, right? You're putting yourself at risk as well. Is that a fair comment, Corey? And maybe some thoughts on what are some best practices when using third parties?
Sure. Yeah. With unsafe consumption, one of the major issues there is too much trust being applied to well-known third-party API providers. And so because of that trust that shouldn't exist, additional vulnerabilities can be a part of that relationship. If that API isn't held to the same standard as any other user supplied input that's being ingested by an application, if that third party API is compromised, then that's just a new attack vector into your organization. And those third party APIs have to be untrusted to the same level as user input. So the same standards that are applied have to be applied equally. And that trust needs to be minimized as much as possible.
Term I hear all the time, input validation, right?
Yeah.
Just because you trust this API doesn't mean the data you're getting back is clean, it's non-tampered. You should put it through the same validation processes that you do for any of your direct supplied or inputted information. So definitely a key best practice. Let's hit our last one here, 622. Casey, walk us through
So this one does not have specific mention of API, and I think has been pointed out, and we'll get to it actually on the next slide. All of these requirements to some degree could impact an API, the development of an API that you're using either yourself to receive cardholder data or to interact with cardholder data, or third-party APIs that you're doing that might have some tie-in to some in-scope system component or service that you're doing that is involved in the security of cardholder data as well. And we'll get to that in the next slide, like I said, but this is one we wanted to highlight specifically, as this is an enhanced requirement that they've released within version 4.0. This requirement was around in prior versions, and the enhancements that they made to this involve the 3 bullet points that you see on the left there. This is a training requirement. So basically any of the software developers that work on that bespoke or custom software within your organization that is in scope, there's an expectation that they have training performed about good code training or secure code training every 12 months. And the enhancements that they made in this requirement are such that they want to see that those elements of the bullet point, specifically that the languages that are being used for the in-scope service, that there's actual training done on those languages specifically, as well as testing tools that might be used to detect vulnerabilities or anything like that. So Before, the requirement was pretty vague where you just had to do secure code training. It had to be relevant somewhat to what you had in scope, but there was nothing designated within the requirement language about what it actually had to be. They've since added this additional detail to make sure that there's coverage over the things that you might specifically be using that might have impact to those in scopes, APIs, or other system components that are interacting with cardholder data.
Yes, it's interesting here. This one caught my eye as well, not least of which Corey and I have created this APIsec University, and we have a bunch of courses on secure API coding and testing and the fundamentals. Definitely invite everyone on the call to go check it out. These are free courses. And we even now, due to popular demand, offer those courses for internal deployment. So a lot of organizations want to be able to assign courses, track the completion, that sort of thing. That's something of interest to you, definitely reach out, let us know. We can actually deliver these courses for internal deployment as well. Before we hit requirement 6 in general, Corey, do you have any thoughts or comments on this one? Is this something you see out there with your clients?
Yeah, this is just another very important layer of defense when it comes to APIs specifically, and making sure that a secure coding practice is a part of this, and training is a part of life cycle of the application. Very important. That's going to help with some of the vulnerabilities we've discussed already. Specifically, business logic flaws. Those are very difficult to discover, and to have a security voice early in the design of an application and API, that should help introduce some thoughts that maybe this feature could be used against the organization. Maybe we should go about this feature in some other way.
Yeah, we talk a lot about in the courses, and we actually have a couple upcoming webinars on API governance. How do you develop? How do you deploy? How do you publish and operate APIs in a secure way? We hear things like, rogue and shadow APIs because that are unknown and so forth. Those are symptoms of weak governance. You shouldn't, you should be having very strict processes and controls about how you develop your APIs, standard style guides, deployment processes, testing, and so forth. And that all falls under the umbrella of governance. Let's wrap up.
If we could
Go ahead.
slide for just one more item. Yeah, the other important item here to hit on is testing of APIs. And so that's one of the things we really focused on in the API pen test course. Is a lot of the automated tools out there that are very popular and in use for enterprise vulnerability management completely miss 9 out of 10 of the OWASP API security top 10 vulnerabilities that affect APIs. So making sure that the correct tests are being done to discover the most common vulnerabilities for these applications, probably one of the most important aspects of this slide.
Yeah, I love that quote from an interview you did. Most of the sort of standard web and mobile scanning tests miss most of the flaws that lead to breaches. And it's because we're not talking about your common vulnerabilities or low-hanging fruit, right? The things that break APIs are logic flaws or things of that sort, the authorization issues and so forth. Yeah, testing is absolutely critical here. So bring us home here, Casey. Wrap up requirement 6. I know we've got a few questions, and we'll certainly happily take more in the chat. Summarize this whole section 6.
Yeah, so as you've been paying attention, everything we've been talking about here, all these requirements that we've gone through, they've all been found within section 6 of the DSS across those 12 different requirements that we highlighted at the beginning. And as you can see, section 6 is its titled. It's all about developing and maintaining secure systems and software. So we called these out specifically because this is where the council has made mention specifically of APIs within the guidance that they provided within this new version that you saw there. And as Dan said earlier, in prior versions, you wouldn't find mention of APIs in any of that guidance documentation before. However, they've highlighted those items, but I just wanted to mention requirement 6 in general here, is it's relevant for any development of custom code or, like I said, bespoke software that is developed that has impacts to your PCI scope. And if you have that custom service or that custom software that you're developing that has interaction with cardholder data. And what this section is meant to do is it's all around secure development. So it involves things like vulnerability detection, effective patching processes, SDLC policies with supporting documentation to back it up, effective use of test environments in relation to production environments, as well as how you use production and test data and making sure that they stay within their respective environments. And so this whole requirement is built around these items to help ensure that the development practices and vulnerability management are done in a way such that it promotes a secure development of a product that is ultimately released into production.
Yeah, thank you for walking us through that. This whole section 6 for everyone that's listening, if you're in cyber, if you're subject to PCI, this is a section you got to know. I wanted to give us a little plug here, window. This is, guys, can you hear me all right? And
Yep.
roll echo. All right. This is APIsec University. We launched this last August, Corey and I. It's been a really fun project. It's actually north of 50,000 students, over half the Fortune 100 enrolled in our courses. This is Corey's flagship course, the pen testing course. It's fantastic if you really want to learn a lot about these techniques of how to hack APIs, how to do API recon, look for authorization, authentication, all kinds of vulnerabilities. This is the course to take, API Security Fundamentals. This is my course. It's kind of an intro level. It's 90 minutes. A lot of companies are now deploying this internally for developers, for product managers, API owners. This is the one Corey was teasing a little earlier, so stay tuned for some news there. We've started a whole bunch of mini courses here, so if you got 15 minutes, you can learn about cores or error disclosure. We're going to launch information leak, I think, tomorrow. And what we've got up here at the very top, you just mentioned like secure software lifecycle. We're actually got a webinar coming up in about a month. It's going to feature the former chief software officer of the Department of Defense, so Jason Weiss, and our good friend Bill Jones, true API security experts. So we'll be talking about how do you shift API security into the software lifecycle. Highly recommend folks to register for that. You can find the link right here at the top of APIsec U. And the last plug, I promise, is we're actually running the security track of Appy Days Interface, which takes place in about 2 weeks. Virtual event, really fantastic lineup of security topics here around APIs and beyond. So with that, really appreciate you guys. Let's see what we got here in terms of some last questions. I'll leave this up. Thank you guys, Casey, Corey from Moss Adams. Got to plug the Hacking APIs book. But let's take a look at some of the questions we got. There were some really interesting ones. There was one about why should you use a third-party API? I can't find it here now, but it was like, if you can't trust it, why use it? So Corey, like, why would I use a third-party API if I can't trust it?
Yeah, third-party APIs really enable a lot of the digital economy. It's one of the major benefits of using APIs to begin with, which is leveraging the expertise of other organizations. I did not use third-party APIs. My organization would have to develop their own method for using maps, for using payment, for using GPS, so on and so forth. And so leveraging the expertise of those other organizations really enables your developers to focus on the business purpose of the organization they're at. And specific to PCI, the third-party API would enable you to leverage other payment processors and their security and their expertise in order to process payment.
Let's take this one from Marius. What does PCI DSS 4.0 say about encryption between internal services? For example, between an API service and a front end?
Good question, Marius. So there are encryption requirements within the DSS standard. They cover a number of different things. Most of them are focused on remote management of system components that are in scope, as well as encryption around the passing of credentials. There is no requirement. There was one proposed, but it did not make the final version, about encrypting actual account data across internal networks. There are requirements around encrypting cardholder data or account data across public networks, and that is what requirement 4 is all about. But as far as internal trusted network communication is concerned, there are no dedicated requirements around encrypting that data outside of remote management, remote administrative management, and the passing of credentials.
And maybe related here from a DT, does the 4.0 requirement ask for application layer encryption of login passwords for data in transit, in addition to the network layer encryption?
That's the recent one that was just posted on there. Sorry.
Yeah, this one from a DT.
Yeah. So there are, like I said, there are requirements around encrypting credentials, right? So this is a requirement. It's the old 8.2.1. I'm having to relearn the requirements and I don't know all the new ones by memory off the top of my head. but there are requirements in there about the passing of credentials around internal networks. So anything that is traversing your internal network that would be considered a credential or a secret that could potentially provide access to a system and component, that does need to go through some form of application that protects the password in transit as well as in storage.
Maybe the last one we'll take here is from Edgar. Simple question. Where can you access this 4.0 guides? Where can people go to get this info?
I apologize. Was
Yeah, for you, like where can people find the DSS 4.0, the documentation, the details? Is that just on the PCI
Yeah, sorry, I think
website?
I might have cut out there for a second, Dan. But yeah, good question. All of this information is found on the council's website. They have the DSS published there. You can go there and pull it down and you can look through all of the requirements that are there. Additionally, there's other resources that they have, guidance documents that they call them. Just one, for example, about how to scope PCI assessments. I talked about that one a little bit. And if you're looking for more information about how those are performed, you can do that. The PCI Council releases FAQs about frequently asked questions in regards to anything PCI related. They also hold special interest groups that my organization has been part of. I've had a few of my team members who have been part of these SIGs that have put out guidance documents around various industry topics such as containerization and orchestration and how to best practice those. It's very likely they could do one more dedicated to APIs at some point. Those are always being proposed, and they put together those groups to help provide some of that feedback.
It sure seems like APIs are on the radar now. I noticed just this week, FedRAMP released Rev 5, and in their monthly vulnerability scanning, it now says including API. So it has definitely hit the regulators' radar for good reason. And so if you're subject to any of these, or even if you're not and you got APIs, yeah, you definitely want to be making sure they're tested, secured, and free of vulnerabilities. So with that, guys, thank you a ton. I learned a lot on this session. I really appreciate it, Casey and Corey. Like I said, there's a ton of great resources over at Moss Adams. If you want to learn more about PCI, plenty of other regulations. If you want to learn more about how to hack APIs, Corey's got a great book for you, or go over to APIsec University, where you can learn a whole lot. And all of our courses are free, offer certifications, you name it. And as I said, if your organization wants to deploy any of these courses internally, just reach out. We can help you out as well. So with that, thanks everyone. I really appreciate you all joining us for the last 50 minutes and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks, Casey.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Corey.
Thanks, man.
Take care, everyone.